It is Sunday, the 6th of August, 2017, and I'm in front of the Unitarian Church of Montreal, just starting up my alternative spiritual practice of protesting against Unitarian Universalist injustices, abuses, and hypocrisy. And what we're looking at is the so-called wayside pulpit of the Unitarian Church of Montreal. I like to also refer to it as the wayward pulpit, because much of what is written on here, which looks very nice, is rarely actually practiced by Montreal Unitarians. It's essentially, they do not walk the talk, so they're off track and very hypocritical. So this, I believe, is the mission statement of the Unitarian Church of Montreal. And it says, our spiritual community welcomes, nurtures, inspires, challenges. Together we take action in the world. Well, that sounds all very nice, but it's incredibly vague. It doesn't really say what Montreal Unitarians welcome, doesn't say what they nurture, doesn't say what they inspire, doesn't say what they challenge, doesn't say what kind of actions they take in the world. Right now we got a couple of Montreal Unitarians here taking action in terms of doing some gardening, cleaning up the yard in front of the church. So that's one action, one generally positive action that Montreal Unitarians take in the world. But the fact of the matter is this mission statement can be interpreted very negatively. The Unitarian Church of Montreal does in fact welcome things that are not very positive. One thing that the Unitarian Church of Montreal has certainly welcomed in the past, and probably still welcomes, is anti-religious intolerance and bigotry on the part of its hardcore atheist members, including its hardcore atheist minister, Reverend Ray Drennan. The Unitarian Church of Montreal certainly welcomed his intolerance and bigotry, and by doing absolutely nothing to hold Reverend Ray Drennan, to say nothing of other Montreal Unitarians, accountable for their anti-religious intolerance and bigotry. And so one day they actually nurtured it. To some extent they may have even inspired it. And they certainly did not challenge it. I mean, that's something that should be challenged, but they never did challenge it. I challenged it, and I got thrown out of the church for challenging it. So that was an action that the Montreal Unitarians took in the world. They threw me out of the church for complaining about the anti-religious intolerance and bigotry that I was subjected to by Reverend Ray Drennan and Frank Green and Val Bourdon and other leading members of the Unitarian Church of Montreal. Here's another action that Unitarians take. This isn't specifically Montreal Unitarians who took this action. This is the Unitarian Universalist Association in Boston, which is essentially the headquarters of Unitarian Universalism in North America and to some extent internationally and around the world. The Unitarian Universalist Association hired Canadian lawyer, Stikeman Elliott barristers and solicitors litigation lawyer, Maitre Marc-André Coulombe, to falsely accuse me of the criminal act of blasphemous libel in clergy sex abuse cover-up and denial legal bullying that was clearly intended to cover up and possibly even outright deny what Maitre Coulombe described as such despicable crimes as pedophilia and rape committed by certain Unitarian Universalist ministers. And so while Montreal Unitarians may not be directly responsible for this action taken by their fellow Unitarian Universalists in the United States, the highest levels of leadership of the Unitarian Universalist Association, what they have done is they have tried to conceal this attempted misuse of Canada's blasphemy law. They've done things to try and prevent the public from becoming aware of this. I put down chalk slogans. This is one of the actions I take in the world. I put down chalk slogans protesting against Unitarian Universalist clergy abuse and Unitarian Universalist cover-up and denial of clergy abuse. And I have, of course, picket signs which protest against Unitarian Universalist clergy abuse and Unitarian Universalist cover-up and denial of clergy abuse, not just pedophilia and rape, by the way, but less serious forms of clergy sexual abuse and even non-sexual clergy abuse, such as the anti-religious intolerance and bigotry that Reverend Ray Drennan engaged in, and some of the extremely offensive and verbally and psychologically abusive behavior that the Reverend Dr. Victoria Weinstein, also known as Peace Bang, engages in. The Montreal Unitarians, besides erasing my picket signs, they steal my besides erasing my chalk slogans, they steal my picket signs. They physically assault me in attempts to intimidate me. They have repeatedly called in basically false reports or highly misleading reports to the police in efforts to have the police shut down my protest. I've actually been falsely arrested on false criminal charges that I was acquitted of after, several court dates. I was accused of violating Section 176.3 of the Canadian Criminal Code, which prohibits disrupting the order and solemnity of church services. Now, that law is obviously intended, it's a bit windy today, so I don't have too many picket signs out. That law is obviously intended to, prohibit, actual disruptions of church services. So it's essentially intended for activity taking place inside a church, that disrupts the service. It's not intended to apply to a protest taking place outside the church, particularly a protest that is essentially very quiet, pretty well invisible to people inside the church, in no way really disrupts the order and solemnity of the church service itself. This was a very cynical misuse of the Canadian Criminal Code, similarly cynical to, falsely accusing me of blasphemous libel in, legaling intended to intimidate me into removing blog posts that tell the readily verifiable truth about such despicable crimes as pedophilia and rape committed by certain Unitarian Universalist ministers. So there's all kinds of negative, harmful, abusive actions that Montreal Unitarians and indeed other Unitarian Universalists, top-level UUA leaders, various Unitarian Universalist ministers around the world engage in. So here we see them working, tending their garden, taking care of the plants. Nothing wrong with that. That's a fine activity to engage in, but if only they put a similar amount of effort into dealing responsibly with the issues I have raised with this protest. Instead of spending considerable energy trying to shut down my protest, trying to deny the truth, they should spend a similar amount of energy to actually practice what they preach, which is a free and responsible search for truth and meaning, and justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. If Unitarian Universalists spent a reasonable amount of time and energy on just practicing what they preach instead of making a total mockery of what they preach, this protest would have ended a long time ago. It might never have begun. In fact, it definitely would not have begun if Unitarian Universalists had actually practiced justice, equity, and compassion in their human relations with me, but they chose not to. They chose instead to pervert justice and deny and delay justice and so on. So here we are protesting, and it's been quite a while because Montreal Unitarians and Unitarian Universalists more generally are very, very stubborn people when it comes to not dealing responsibly with their own internal injustices, abuses, and hypocrisy. They're very good at pointing the finger at injustices and abuses in the outside world. They're very good at pointing their finger at injustices committed by the government or other religious communities, but when it comes to their own injustices and abuses, well, all of a sudden they're willfully blind. So we got this woman talking to the guy walking his dog, and who knows what it's about, but it could be about yours truly. So I got a funny feeling it's about me. I suspect what happened is the guy asked a question about the protest, and she's giving her distorted version of the truth. She gave me this embarrassed smile when I walked by. So if the guy wants to swallow a pile of bullshit, well, I guess he can.
Catholic in the sense of his wrong one, also
So the guy said something about the Catholic community. Didn't catch exactly what. But anyhow, yeah, I mean, I don't know for sure because I haven't really heard very clearly what she's saying. But I have reasonable grounds to believe that she's basically feeding this guy a line of bullshit about my protest, you know, how they're the victims of an unjust protest and so on, which is completely ridiculous and easily proven to be false. Every single word on my picket signs and my blog posts is supported by evidence. Now I can point to, certain Unitarian Universalist ministers who've been charged, tried, and convicted of such despicable crimes as pedophilia and rape. In fact, the Unitarian Universalist pedophiles and rapists that I blogged about, who Maitre Marc-André Coulombe tried to pretend my blog posts were unfounded, were actually convicted of pedophilia and or rape and sentenced to jail terms and spent some years in jail. So nothing unfounded about that.
Oh, absolutely.
So the guy's walking away. I mean, I could have said something. I could have said, well, if she is talking about my protest, you just swallowed a line of bullshit. And how does that taste? But I decided not to intervene at this point in time. I'll probably see the guy again. He walks his dog, so it's probably not the first or last time he's walking his dog by the church. I know he may even ask me a question at some point, so we'll see what comes of that. But as far as interactions with the public go, when I'm able to speak with members of the public, their responses are overwhelmingly positive and supportive, and they understand the issues and so on. So we'll see what comes of this guy's chat, if anything. But he can hop on the internet. He can Google Unitarian Church of Montreal, and he can Google sexual abuse and so on, Unitarian Universalist. He can get some reliable information, not just from myself, but from other sources. So we shall continue to protest here. Speaking of reliable information about Unitarian Universalist clergy abuse, I was on Facebook 2 or 3 days ago now, and I came across a blog post by a lawyer in the San Diego, California area, Eric Isaacson. I think his middle name was there, but I can't remember it off the top of my head. But essentially this blog post was about his wife. And his wife happens to be a former UUA trustee and former UUA vice moderator, Susan Weaver, who is also a lawyer, and how she was speaking about Unitarian Universalist clergy sexual misconduct to delegates at the Unitarian Universalist Association's General Assembly in 2016. So she did a presentation about clergy sexual misconduct and how the Unitarian Universalist Association is handling it during the 2016 UUAGA. And somebody chimed in and said, by the way, another Eric, the guy's name was also Eric, but a different Eric, and he chimed in and said, are there Unitarian clergy incidents, I've never heard of any, which is perhaps not surprising considering how hard Unitarians and even how successfully Unitarians are able to cover up their clergy abuse. They're less and less able to these days, but going back 10, 20 years, they were able to keep it pretty well hidden for the most part. The internet obviously made a big difference. Anyway, so this guy asked, are there any, incidents of, clergy abuse in the Unitarian Universalist religious community? And the Eric, whose Facebook account it was, Eric Isaacson, the husband of UUA vice moderator Susan Weaver, who one would expect to be well informed through her about Unitarian Universalism's rather extensive clergy sexual misconduct problem, came back and he said relatively few, or comparatively few. I think actually his word was comparatively few. And he pointed out, how the Roman Catholic Church is so much bigger than Unitarian Universalism, and therefore it stands to reason that there would be much more Roman Catholic clergy sexual abuse, on a purely statistical basis, and he's right about that. I've often pointed out myself how the number of cases of Unitarian Universalist clergy sexual misconduct of one kind or another, may well be significantly smaller than those in the Roman Catholic Church, to say nothing of other larger denominations. But on a per capita